7 times there he was asked, 7 times he offered that line and didn't deny it. The question of whether he took drugs when he was a lawyer is a much more interesting one. And as ever with these things, unless someone is going to come forward and say, yes, I took drugs with Keir Starmer, there's no impetus for him to say anything more detailed. But I suspect lots of broadcasters and journalists watching how uncomfortable he was by the end of that questioning, maybe thinking this is something we might push on in future.
A long overdue squirmathon. That's how the Times describes Sir Keir Starmer's interview with The Sun, which covered everything from pensions and Islamist groups to football shirts, and not saying if he has ever taken drugs. The Labour leader was speaking to The Sun's political editor, Harry Cole, on Harry's new programme, Never Mind the Ballots, which you can watch on The Sun's YouTube channel or at sun.co.uk. Well, what did the Times Radio senior political correspondent Patrick Maguire make of it? Morning to you, Patrick. Well, give us the overview, first of all. I mean, it was quite a long time, and as Tom Peck, your colleague, says, a bit squirmy.
Tom is absolutely right, I think, to say this is the most difficult interview Keir Starmer has faced in a long time. And I think that was mainly because most of the questions the Labour leader was asked by Harry Cole, the political editor of The Sun, were from Sun readers who notoriously don't mince their words on these issues. Keir Starmer, for much of it, managed to stay on message. He was squirming for parts of it, but I'd say it was a strikingly confident performance from Keir Starmer on issues where he felt comfortable. So you mentioned pensions there. He was asked whether he would compensate the WASPy women and found it very easy to merely repeat his line about Labour's fiscal credibility and not making promises they couldn't keep. The Sun's cabinet of voters seemed to like his candor on that question. But it was when he veered away from the questions he would have expected to answer, the political questions, that he seemed to find it much more difficult, not least on that hardy perennial for politicians. Have you ever taken illegal drugs?
Yeah, we'll get on to that in a moment or two, Patrick. But on the broad points, Sir Keir, I mean, they all do, don't they? Spoke about his intentions to be as honest with voters as he possibly can. This is a little bit of that.
I've got a choice to make with the electorate, which is, do I be upfront before the election about what we actually can afford and what we can't? Or do I pretend we can deliver something which I know we actually can't? And I'm in the camp of saying, look, what I don't want to have is a situation where after the election, we're breaking our promises, and therefore I'm taking the decision before the election.
So you're taking the hit now rather than breaking promises after?
I would rather look the public in the eye now and say, there are things I would have liked to have done, but we can't afford to do it because the Tories have broken the economy. And I'm being straight with you, rather than going to an election saying, I can do all these wonderful things, and guess what? Just like you've been let down before, afterwards, we won't be able to deliver it. I'm not going to do that.
Well, Patrick, that really is preparing the ground, isn't it? I mean, and that in part is because of the effectiveness of the Conservatives' scorched earth policy, tax cuts, which Labour won't reinstitute, and, of course, all these big spending commitments on compensation. You mentioned there the so-called WASPy women, women who were moved on 6-7 years in terms of their pension retirement age. What else have we got? We've got contaminated blood and, of course, the post office.
The post office, indeed, and also Keir Starmer recommitted to spending commitments he's already made, which is to reverse the cuts that have been made to the army. It's an interesting approach, though, Keir Starmer is employing, because in the past, when he's been asked about U-turns and breaking promises and where he stands on the programme of sort of wholesale renationalisation that he promised in his Labour leadership campaign, he struggled to answer those questions. But now I think Labour have managed to settle on this line, which is there are lots of things we would have liked to have done before the Conservatives crashed the economy, in their words. If you look at our policy platform, they say, much of it is still happening. Look at Keir Starmer's 5 missions. But they're trying to make a virtue, as you heard from Keir Starmer there, of candor, of promising things they feel they can deliver. The other thing Keir Starmer did last night, very explicitly, was to say he wasn't going to raise taxes beyond the VAT levy on private schools and closing a few tax loopholes, not that he said what they were. And that was a very straightforward promise he made yesterday in response to a straightforward question, which was, in the context of all of those commitments you've just mentioned, and then some, where is Labour going to find the money? Keir Starmer giving a very straight answer yesterday. He's not going to increase taxes on working people, which might constrain their room for manoeuvre.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about straight answers to that. Well, not a straight answer to the question about youthful dalliance with drugs or not. Let's just listen to a bit of that.
When did you last take illegal drugs?
Harry, I had a good time when I was a student.
What does a good time when you're a student look like there?
It means I had a good time when I was a student.
But what does that mean?
It means I had a good time when I was a
Smoking
student.
some spliffs, doing some acid, partying, drugs. What was it?
A good time.
You're not answering the question, are you?
I had a good time when I was a student.
Did you ever do drugs after you left university?
Look, I had a good time when I was a student, and whichever way you put this, Harry.
Did you do drugs when you were a lawyer?
Look, Harry, I'm not going down that road.
Patrick, I mean, what do you think about how he handled it there, and what he has to come up with in the future in terms of a response to that question, which presumably will be asked of him again? I mean, are the shades of Bill Clinton? What was he asked about smoking cannabis? You know, I did, but I never inhaled.
It's interesting, isn't it, that answer to the question? Because had Harry Cole not asked that supplementary question about taking drugs when he'd been a lawyer, that sort of catch-all, that non-denial, that I had fun when I was a student, without elaborating, might have worked. But 7 times there he was asked, 7 times he offered that line and didn't deny it. The question of whether he took drugs when he was a lawyer is a much more interesting one, and as ever with these things, unless someone is going to come forward and say, yes, I took drugs with Keir Starmer, there's no impetus for him to say anything more detailed. But I suspect lots of broadcasters and journalists watching how uncomfortable he was by the end of that questioning may be thinking this is something we might push on in future. And I'm not sure, given that the question will inevitably be, OK, we accept you had a good time at university, but you still haven't given us a denial or any answer on what you were doing perhaps in your 20s, may demand Keir Starmer's team to come up with another artful non-denial.
Another formulation. OK, Patrick. Thank you very much indeed, Patrick Maguire. Then we've got a WhatsApp on that from Nick Gregory, who says quite simply, times, it's 2024, not 1974. People took drugs in their youth. It's not a story. If you want to get in touch with us on WhatsApp, 0333 003 2353.